Welcome back to the potting shed. Today I want to talk to you about this here Calathea Orbifolia, an absolute beauty of a houseplant with these fantastic leaves. Actually one of my favourite houseplants, and today I want to give you a care guide for beginners, because I think this is a plant that attracts a lot of people. And if you're new to keeping houseplants and you found this video because you've picked yourself up one of these beauties, then you're in the right place, because there's some very specific things that you need to bear in mind when looking after Calathea. And so it's worth thinking about these things first, because these are a little bit picky when it comes to care, and I don't want you guys to get worried if it doesn't do so well. Because I would actually say that this plant is on the scale of sort of beginner to advanced. I would say this is definitely on the medium side of things, and maybe even medium to advanced, because it is just so picky. It sulks, it will often have these brown tips. Can you see that? The tips go brown and crispy, and if you're not careful, that can spread to big sections of the leaves and can give you really big problems. And depending on the size of the Calathea that you buy, you can really spend quite a bit of money on this. So to begin with, if you're a beginner, then firstly I would say don't beat yourself up if you struggle with this plant. It's not you, it's the Calathea, because they are very picky and they're tricky. It doesn't mean that you can't look after them perfectly well, but you do have to give it a bit more attention than you would do maybe some other house plants. And I wouldn't call it a beginner friendly plant. But if you have one and you're totally in love with it, as I am, then I don't blame you. Let's see if we can get you up to scratch and give you the tips that you need to be the best plant parent you possibly can for your own beautiful Calathea. So let's get started. In this care guide, I want to go through the main points of watering, light requirements, heat and humidity. These are the key elements that you'll need to get right to be able to not only keep your houseplant surviving, but really get it thriving in your environment. And so the first thing, let's talk about light. It will need a bright location with indirect sunlight. So it will like some bright sunlight, but not direct sunlight. So if you live in a house where you have a south facing window where the sun streams in all the way through the day as it comes around past that window, that sun's going to be very harsh, and these big leaves are going to get scorched. If the sun directly hits these leaves from the window actually will magnify the sun's rays, and you'll scorch the leaves and you'll burn the leaves, which is not a good thing. But what you can do is keep that further back from the window itself, and maybe if that window is in a kitchen, you keep it on the other side of the kitchen so you get all of that lovely light, but not the direct beams of the sun. It's going to be much happier there. And anywhere you put it, it is going to appreciate the light, but it's not going to want the direct sun hitting the leaves. It will dry out much quicker that way, and it will also scorch the leaves. It won't be as happy. And that brings me on to watering, because being a Calathea, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it! Now, being a Calathea, it will need more water than most houseplants. Now, it doesn't mean it wants to be wet all the time, but it doesn't want to completely dry out either. So the best thing to do is get to know your plant. Feel the surface of the soil. Put your finger down like an inch into the soil. Is it still damp further down? Because the surface of the soil does tend to dry out relatively quickly, but it doesn't mean the whole pot is dry. It just means the surface is. Obviously you get the air here and maybe some light. This is going to be the first place it's going to dry out. But what you need to do is just poke your finger down the side of the pot away from the roots and just get it down there about an inch or so, a couple of centimeters, and feel the sort of moisture level in there. At the moment, this one is still really quite moist, so that doesn't need watering at the moment. But you'll get to know it. Even the weight of it, you'll feel as it dries out, it will get lighter. So the thing I would suggest if you're a beginner is check it regularly. Don't forget about it. So just get used to, as you walk past and you notice it, just put your hand in the soil and poke your finger in and see how it feels. And then slowly over the days, you'll notice as it starts to dry out, okay, now I'm going to water it again. And this is why I don't say it needs watering once a week or twice a week, because depending on your environment, the heat in your home, where you live in the world, how much sun and humidity, all plants are going to dry out at different times. Even the type of soil it's in will make a difference. So the best thing to do is just feel it and see what sort of moisture level there is in there. But this particular plant, you'll know if it's too dry because its leaves will just go, oh. They'll all sag down and it will look quite sad. And that means it's got too dry. So keep an eye on it and just give it a water when it needs it. But when you do water it, give it a good water, because giving it a little bit every now and again is not going to do it any good. What you need to do is just before it dries out, as it's starting, the top inch is dry and it's starting to dry out further down, take it into maybe a sink if you can and water it really well across here, because even if you give it you know, a water for about 30 seconds, the water might, let me pick this up, the water might penetrate down here, but it doesn't mean you're going to get everything all the way through the bottom. And if you think about it, all the roots are going to be nearer the bottom here. So the other thing I would say is you don't want to plant it directly into a pot like this. Although they're very pretty, what you want, if you look closely here, there is actually a plastic pot in here, and then it just happens to be the perfect size. So it looks like it's in here, but it is actually into a black pot. And if I want to, it is such a good size, I don't know how easy it's going to be for me to take out, but it will come out. There we are. See? So if you want to, what you can do is take it out, bring it to the sink and give it a good water all the way around, and make sure the water's running out the bottom for quite a reasonable amount of time. Then you can leave it in the sink to drip drain for half an hour or so, and then you can put it back in the pot. Because if you plant it directly into a pot like this, you can't control how much water you put in there. The water's got nowhere to go. So you end up having to give it a little bit less than it needs, because the last thing you want is to have a whole load of water sat at the bottom here, because if you leave too much water sat in the bottom, the roots will begin to rot and then the plant will die. Number one tip, don't plant it directly into a pot. You can keep it in a pot like this, but find a plastic pot that fits perfectly and then use that. That way you have more control. You can take it out, water it and put it back. That is the ideal solution with the watering. Now, what sort of water are we going to use? Well, again, because it's a Calathea and because it's an Orbifolia, tap water it doesn't particularly like. The dissolved heavy metals and calcium in a lot of tap water, especially if you've got hard tap water, it won't like. What happens is it builds up in the leaf, and the leaf is thinnest on the edge here, and that is where you'll find the crisping of the leaves starting at the thinnest point of the leaf, because a leaf breathes through a technique called transpiration, and that's how it takes up water into the plant, it uses it, and then the water comes out through the pores in the leaves, and that's called transpiration, and that is water vapor. But it needs to be only the water comes out. So if there's already dissolved solids in the water, then that will stay in here and build up, whereas the water will actually come out. But if you've got something like rainwater, if you have a garden and you have a way of capturing rainwater, that is much, much better. There's a lot less of those type of heavy metals and calcium in the water. So it's going to be much better for the plant and it will appreciate it. It's going to cut down on the amount of browning you're going to have in the leaf tips. Alternatively, you can use distilled water, also known as reverse osmosis water, and that actually physically filters out those dissolved solids and heavy metals. If you can get one of those and use that water, you're going to have no problems with the dissolved solids and things. It doesn't mean you're not going to get perfect leaves, because I use RO water, and as you can see, they're not bad. If you look at it on a whole, they're not bad, but there are still here and there the odd tiny little crispy. This is a particularly big bit on here, but I've left them on just so you can see it. What you can do, if you get the odd bit, you can just take some scissors and just cut that brown bit off. Just tidies it up and makes it look a little bit better. But ultimately, if you can use non-hard tap water, it's going to help a lot. Now, if you live in a country or an area in your country that has particularly soft, good quality water, maybe you've got water coming down from the mountains, then you're very lucky. You probably don't have to worry about that. You can use it straight out of the tap, which is great. Now let's move on to humidity. This is the other reason why you'll get browning of the leaves, and probably why I have the odd browning on the leaf tips. I think it's more to do with humidity on my particular plant, because it's winter here in the UK, and because this is my favourite plant, I have it in my living space in what we call the lounge in the UK, and I like to look at it there. But it's probably the driest room in my house. I have a humidifier, but I keep it in a different room, and so this is on display. But in the winter time here in the UK, we've got the central heating on, and the radiators dry out the atmosphere in the air, and so it's a drier environment. So you kind of have to make compromises, because yes, ideally you could have a room with all your plants in one room and have a humidifier running. Humidifier machine actually puts water vapor into the air and raises the humidity level in that room. That would be great, but it's not always practical, and you might not be able to properly enjoy your plant if it's all locked away in a temperature controlled and humidity controlled room. So we've got to make some compromises, and for me, I still enjoy this plant with a little bit of browning to the leaf tips, and in the summer it's better, and so I'm quite happy to enjoy it with 90% nice looking leaves, and I tolerate the odd brown here and there, because, you know, this is nature we're dealing with. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can still enjoy the plant without it being a perfect representative of the plant. But it's obviously, we try and get it as good as we can, and obviously you don't want massive, like half of the leaf being brown, because it's not going to look very nice. So we do what we can, using the right water, watering more regularly to make sure that soil remains relatively moist, not wet but moist. If you can give it a bit more humidity, you can put it on what we call a humidity tray, which is some pebbles, and you put the pot on the pebbles and put water into that tray. And so what you don't want is water going up into the pot, because then it's going to constantly be watering the pot. You want the water to sit there and then slowly evaporate, which creates an area of slightly heightened humidity around the plant. It's not much, but it all adds up. If you can get an extra 3% humidity in the general area of your plant, you only need to fill up that humidity tray a couple of times a week, and you're going to be just giving it a little bit more help. So that's something to bear in mind. The other thing is, if you do want to keep your Calathea with other houseplants, that's going to help with the humidity, because the more houseplants around it are going to create almost like a microclimate, because each one of them is going to have an amount of moisture in the soil, and that will be transpiring and putting water vapor into the air from the leaves, just like this does. And it will create, if they're all close together, they're all slowly putting off a small amount of moisture, and that will raise the moisture level in the atmosphere around all of the plants. So that will help as well. Obviously, if you haven't got the space, or you don't want to keep all of your houseplants in the same place, that's not something you have to do. But if you do, it will help. Now, lastly, I want to talk about feeding the plant, because there is a finite amount of food in the pots. When it comes to you, the compost will have its own nutrients in the pot, But unlike in nature, if it's in the ground where there is actively nutrients in the ground and things constantly breaking down and providing more nutrients, as you find in nature, this is kind of a closed off environment. So we need to add more food into the pot periodically. So in the growing season, so that's in spring to autumn, when the plant is actively growing, we need to feed it. Maybe once or twice a month, you can give it a feed of plant fertiliser. The best stuff to use is something that you can dilute down into the water and then water it as usual. And then that will go throughout the plant pot and slowly go up into the roots and feed the plant as it takes on the water. So I think that covers all the bases. Like I said, not an easy one. So if you do struggle with this plant, please don't beat yourself up over it. It's all part of the learning process, and there are a lot easier plants to start off with. And so if you want to find them, have a look at some of the other videos in my channel for some plants that are good for beginners. Things like spider plants, money trees, aspidistra, all plants that are much more forgiving, easy to look after. Tradescantia is another one. Beautiful looking plants, much easier to look after. And if you forget to water it maybe once and go away for a few days and you come back and it's looking all a bit limp and unhappy, you just water it, it will come back to life without any problem at all. So don't worry, even if your new Calathea dies, then it's just a part of the learning process. So don't give up if that's you. Go to the garden centre, find something else and give it another go. But in the meantime, please give this video a thumbs up if you found it useful. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you again very soon. Thanks for watching.